Let me take you somewhere I hope you've never been. I also hope you'll never go there. Like the normally firing neurons in the brain you see, my brain was fine one moment in 1988, and then something unexpected happened. It was like an explosion. My voice came and went. I couldn't control my movement. I struggled to breathe. I went to the computer to email Washington, D.C., and couldn't remember how to use the computer. Everything around me smelled awful. I sensed I was surrounded by brown, as if brown were a thing instead of a color of a thing. I knew it made no sense. For a moment, I wondered whether I had just entered the world of the insane. I was dizzy, my world spiraled, I was out of control. I'm an analyzer. My mind was busy trying to sort out what happened so I could fix it. I did not have time for crazy stuff. I had to prepare for a management briefing. There was terrific news to report. I was a workaholic and focused on my goals. I worked in human resources at the Seattle District Corps of Engineers. The human resources officer would retire in less than a year. It was the next level in my career ladder, and I wanted the job. I was already budgeting for the office. I had an exceptional rating in the Army Career Program for the position. Life was good. In a brief time, I'd learned that I'd been slowly poisoned from an office renovation where styrene butadiene and trimolytic anhydride played prominent roles. My body had reached its limit. Small, toxic exposure over time can have a more significant effect than a large toxic event in a short period of time. Low levels can fail to trigger safety mechanisms in the body. Something in me had just broken. I could no longer work. The problems were serious. There was no cure. I struggled just to survive at first. I entered a fog where normally thoughts crowded my mind. Days would pass when my brain did not generate a single verbal thought. It was a silence, not a lack of consciousness, depression, or some form of psychosis. When the silence occurred, I was unmoved. After the event passed, I was frightened by it. It would be a long time before I understood the silence. My ears hummed like old computers all the time. My sense of smell was greatly heightened. I compared myself to a dog. I'd stand in the cereal aisle in the grocery store, smelling 20 or so fragrances of cereal through the packaging. Each smell was discreet. All could be smelled simultaneously. The same was true of walking past a flower garden where many plants bloomed, or being overwhelmed with the scent of honeysuckle when only a tiny cluster of flowers had opened. In crowded places, I'd know whether people had bathed, used good dental hygiene, or had an illness. With this ability to smell, I could follow the path of a perfumed person in a building and know where they'd gone, if the scent trail didn't bring me to my knees in sickness and foggy disorientation. Sometimes I might have appeared inebriated. I had extreme difficulty walking. My balance was impaired. Passing a car that had a spill of antifreeze under the hood, I was so disoriented that I was stumbling over my feet and walking into walls. At times, my walking was so bad that I would go to the banister in the hallway. I'd hold onto it and walk back and forth, if you could call that walking. I would not give up, but instead I kept forcing myself to continue until I was no longer able. Nobody knew what was wrong. I felt as if I had a species change. All the while, deep inside, I was burning to return to work. Fortunately, I had insurance. I had test after test. The first testing was neuropsychological for cognitive function. The results were not encouraging. I tested at the severely impaired level. My IQ had dropped through the floor, and 94% of the population could focus better than I could. Doctors told me I had been poisoned and had developed chemical sensitivity. In order to work, I knew I needed a whole brain. The next test was a PET scan of my brain at the University of California at Irvine. The PET scan is a test of metabolic function. It showed lesions on the left hippocampus, uncus, and anterior medial frontal region. The hippocampus is on either side of the head. It transfers short-term to long-term memory. Fortunately, only one hippocampus was damaged. The uncus is the part of the brain where smell occurs. That lesion was causing my incredible ability to smell. Just as if you rub over an injured part of the skin, it makes the skin more sensitive. Injury to the uncus can make the sense of smell exquisitely acute. I had a SPECT scan of the brain in Seattle. It showed decreased blood flow and thinning, characteristic of vascular disease, not Alzheimer's. Was that supposed to be encouraging? I wondered. Finally, I found a Seattle doctor with a brain electrical activity mapping machine and made an appointment. When he finished with history and review, I asked him to consider running a challenge brain map test using a can of W. Henry's carpet glue without stirring it. He was delighted. I did not know he was a defense doctor who was convinced that multiple chemical sensitivity syndrome was a label for the crazies and lazies. It wouldn't have mattered. The test would show what it would show. He ran the test. He asked me to let him rerun the test. I agreed. When I returned, I came with a video camera. He had agreed that I could tape his explanation. The first thing he said to me was about 4 inches from my face. He said, "I hate you." I don't intimidate easily, so I just looked at him. He explained. He was convinced something was wrong with his machine. He'd had it calibrated before testing me. He had it recalibrated after testing me because he could not believe the initial results. The 2 tests were identical. The results left him wondering how I functioned at all. It also destroyed his view of himself, for I'd shown him to be very wrong, and there was no way to undo the damage he'd done. He ran the quantitative EEG and evoked potentials while I videotaped. The testing was exhaustive, so I'll only mention a few things it showed. The humming in my ears is a misdirected visual signal. I hear what I see. Here's a piece of the actual video recording.
It just means that the information from your foot is at so low magnitude that you're likely to have trouble even knowing where your feet are.
Yes.
And that's what it tells me. It also tells me that you, and please don't quote me because I don't know this, it tells me that you may be in some danger of actually losing your motion in your feet.
Losing what?
Motion.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, but it looks to me like there's sufficient damage in that area, or whatever it is, that you're getting a damn small signal. The signal is very weak, and the signal doesn't appear to excite the motor cortex hardly at all. That little bit of red is the excitatory stimulus, which should actually be white. It should be a reasonably high intensity, and it's very low intensity. The problem we have with the rest of the cortex is that I can't honestly say there's enough signal there to even balance yourself or see the feet. If you go across the cortex from the late arrival of about 47 or so milliseconds to roughly the end of the signal at the cortex, you see this blue dot, which basically means an absence of the signal, and the signal appears to be on every other area of the brain but the area it's supposed to be. And it finally arrives at the area where supposedly it should be at about 80 to 90 milliseconds. And that's that white color we see right here, and I'll enhance it so you have an idea of what it looks like. But that's the color that the waveform should be. And the kind of waveform you have right there is more on the right side than the left. And since you're simulating the right leg, it should be on the left side.
My hands and feet transmit on such faint signals and so slowly that he could not scientifically prove that I can move. When one object is present, I see 2 images with one eye and 3 with the other. Somehow I'd managed to rewire my brain so I could walk and see single objects. He was astounded. The most terrifying thing he told me during that session is that I could lose the ability to move and to understand and speak language. After hearing that, it was hard to pay attention. The last part of his explanation answered the question about the silence I'd experienced. I had no verbal thoughts because language had turned off. I understood what he said, and I couldn't deny any of it, but I was not willing to become a vegetable if willingness had anything to do with it. In addition to the chemical sensitivity and brain problems, I developed asthma and porphyria. Porphyria is a loss of enzymes in the metabolic pathway of hemoglobin. After 6 positive tests from Mayo's, it's clear I have acute intermittent porphyria and porphyria cutanea tarda. Loss of enzymes leads to an increase of porphyrins. The illustration is a porphyrin. Excess porphyrins cause disease. In acute intermittent porphyria, too many porphyrins cause extremely painful gut problems, like getting stabbed with a very big knife. An attack can lead to respiratory failure. Over 3,000 known substances can set off an attack. In porphyria cutanea tarda, an excess of porphyrins causes lesions to form on skin from sun exposure. Liver cancer is a possibility. The picture was less and less encouraging. Still, I was convinced I had work left to do on this earth. It was a mystery for me how to get from where I was to where I wanted to be. People poisoned at the time I was poisoned were rejected from workers' compensation if the poisoning occurred at work, often failed to secure Social Security disability retirement benefits, and lost lawsuits. I knew people who lived in their cars, having sold everything they cherished just to eat. I held a list of over 100 people who'd committed suicide, not because of the illness, but because of how they were treated. I lost my workers' compensation despite the Corps of Engineers' efforts to help me. Department of Labor did with me what they did routinely. I was on the rolls for 2 years, and then they sent me to doctors, whose reports they knew would be what they wanted. In my case, there were no psychiatric diagnoses. What they used to get me off the comp rolls was the comment, "I can't see anything." The rule for the poisoned was and remains financial ruin, regardless of how it occurs. I became an activist not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stand to see what I saw happening to people through no fault of their own. I knew 2 of the suicide victims. One attorney told me that everybody knew we were sick, but society would ignore it because of the effect that recognizing it would have on the economy. I was naive. I was shocked and outraged. It was a dark time and a time of struggle. I was perplexed as to what to do. Nobody knew how to get me back to where I'd been. Despite my determination, the light was leaving my old life. I realized that if I could do anything to prevent others from being poisoned, I needed to boot up and do it. I decided to write a book. It was a logical decision, but I had no idea how badly my brain had been damaged. I simply knew I had a job to do. I went to the library and used the writer's market. I found 10 potential publishers, and I wrote their information on index cards, created a single-page tip sheet, wrote a cover letter on the computer, and mailed them. McFarland was one of the 10 publishers to whom I sent my query letter. They wanted the book. I know now how rare it is to find a publisher in the first 10 queries, or 20, or more. I eventually produced 2 books that McFarland published. I also know what it took to produce them. My skills had eroded away. Research was hard. Because of the damage to my hippocampus, I couldn't remember. Where I'd once had a near photographic memory, I'd read a single paragraph 25 times just to get the meaning. Then I wrote down what I learned so I wouldn't forget it. Experts took time to help me. It was a mutual effort. I could say things they couldn't. I wrote through the night. There were times I wrote with tears falling down my face. I'm not a person who cries. I just felt sometimes that the task was so unbelievably overwhelming for someone so broken. Twice I stood up to get some coffee and fell to the ground, apparently weightless because I had no feeling at all below my neck. As time passed, I held a red book in my hand. It was as if a tiny light were shining way off in the distance. I had hope. I lived on almost nothing. My mother kept a roof over my head and fed me. I learned what it is to be poor. I had lost everything I had, but one thing. What I retained is happiness, which tied directly to my love of God and my love of life. I flat don't know how not to be a happy person, and that's one thing I have no intention of choosing to learn. Money can't buy happiness, and my happiness is something nobody can take from me. A lovely sunset was my treasure, or a special friendship. I don't need much. I wanted to find a path to a cure. I believed there was potential to get better. I kept researching. Writing the book was fine, but I wanted to return to working as I had worked in the past. Instead, numbers of people were finding me and letting me know they read my book at the time they were ready to commit suicide. The book stopped them. Good thing I didn't know that while I was writing. I moved to Alaska after my mom died. I'd wanted to be there since I taught an instructor training course in 1974 in Anchorage, and then slowly I began to realize that things were changing. I held my mug of coffee out on the deck of my house one morning. It was early. I had a blanket wrapped around me while the dogs ran in the yard below. I watched the sun move through the trees. I realized I could see with remarkable clarity. The clean air in Alaska was making a difference. With great enthusiasm and prematurely, I began to search for a job. I wonder whether workaholics ever change. I tried every job I could find and found every door firmly shut. Finally, I realized that the 23 years I'd been looking for a cure had added greatly to my age. You also have to put information about disabilities on applications, and that didn't help. I moved to Alaska in 2005. I always wanted to know about the places where I live. I began to research. I learned that the Talkeetna Mountains were once enormous. They had a Pacific Ocean view long, long ago. The Chugach Mountains ended that. Where I live, during the Ice Age, I'd have been buried by about a mile of ice. Now there's a thought. I wanted to know who the first Alaskans were because I realized the first Alaskans were supposed to be the first Americans. I'm a workaholic. I don't just research, I research. I discovered quickly that the first Alaskans may not be the first Americans at all. By Americans, I mean North and South America. I have always dug for answers, and digging to answer who were the first Americans makes a hole with no bottom. There is, however, a wealth of information for those who persevere. A friend of mine contacted me and told me about a course I had to take. It was curing her chemical sensitivity. I considered that she might be experiencing the placebo effect. She finally pushed hard. I bought the course. In half a day, I managed by using a neuroplasticity exercise, an exercise I doubted would work, to cure the chemical sensitivity problems. I still had asthma, porphyria, and a strangely rewired brain, but a whole world was open to me with the chemical sensitivity cured. I decided to write. There's no age limit for writers, and it doesn't matter if you have some disabling conditions. I'm not credentialed for nonfiction, and that niche had already been filled by experts. I looked at fiction. I've never written fiction, but that wouldn't stop me. Scientists point to more than 400 pre-Clovis sites across North and South America. My research has shown a human skull fragment found in Mexico under volcanic debris dated to about 250,000 years ago. One site might be even older. I wanted to speculate about pre-Clovis peopling of the Americas, the time before 11,700 years ago. In that genre, there was a single book here and a single book there. A novel series didn't exist. So I dived into the niche. I was excited. I was back at work. My excitement would grow. When my first book came out, people were telling me how I was like a phoenix. I had risen from the ashes of health problems and found a place where I could return to work. Phoenix? I had to laugh. Romanticized bird? Not me. I'll compare myself to the raven. I love them. I identify with them. They're not ashamed to hang around people places, running after the carefully or carelessly dropped French fry, or rifle a truck looking for what's in that garbage bag. They know how to recognize an opportunity and use it. They'll tell us what they think in no uncertain terms, and they'll laugh at us when they make a weird sound, and we turn around wondering what that was. Smart birds with a love of life, no phoenix for me, just a raven. Watch their feathers in a breeze. They don't mind looking ruffled. They are what they are. Observe their feet standing firmly in the snow when the temperature is 30 degrees below zero. Watch their sharp eyes taking in all that goes on. Feel what happens when one looks through your eyes to your soul. Like ravens, I found a great opportunity and took advantage of it. I continue to find opportunities and mine them. Right now, I have 3 novels in my Winds of Change series on the peopling of the Americas. I'm working on the 4th, where the people migrate to Alaska. The first, Kiti's Story, 75,000 BC, establishes the people, a combination of Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons, and Homo erectus. It's the coming-of-age story of a young girl as the people flee the eruption of a supervolcano. The second book is Manak Na's story, 75,000 BC, where Manak Na takes a boat trip from China, Mongolia to Mexico and returns. He sees the evidence that people are already living in the land across the sea. At first, he sees smoke rising in the distance. Later, they stop and he meets a group of people the sailors routinely check on. In Manak Na's story, 75,000 BC, the Denisovans enter the mix of humans. Speaking of Denisovans, I had my own DNA tested and found that I am 2.9% Neanderthal and 4% Denisovan. Now I'm eager for scientists to find Homo erectus DNA. I'll wager I carry some of that too. The third book, Zamimolo's story, 50,000 BC, is a partial migration of the people from China, Mongolia to Central and South America. They face enormous environmental change from 4 seasons with a cold winter to a single annual hot summer, to fauna unlike anything they've ever seen. Examples are Volkswagen-sized armadillos, 20-foot-tall sloths, terror birds as large or larger than humans, and many others. They also meet humans who came by boat long in the past from Africa, and another group from Aboriginal Australia and Pacific Islands. Of course, the people have also sent boats to this land routinely, so some of their distant relatives already live in the land. Now, I need one of these signs. I realize I am fully back to work. I went to a place where most people will never go. I learned much while I was there. And I have returned in many ways so much better than before.